At the family dinner, Dad asked, "The $500,000 I gave you, what did you do with it?" I froze. 500,000? What do you mean? My sister turned pale. 30 minutes later, the cops arrived. My name is Natalie. I am 30 years old, and for the last 7 years, I have been living in Chicago, completely running myself into the ground. If you have ever worked in corporate marketing, you know exactly what I am talking about. It is a soul-crushing grind. My alarm goes off at 5 in the morning every single day. I drag myself out of bed, chug a coffee that tastes like battery acid, and ride the freezing train into the city just to sit under fluorescent lights and listen to my boss yell about engagement metrics and quarterly goals. I was making decent money, sure, but I had absolutely no life. No time to date, barely any time to see friends, and certainly no time to just breathe. But I did it because I had a plan. I was not going to be a corporate drone forever. My ultimate dream, the thing that kept me going on those nights when I was still at my desk at 9 o'clock, was opening my own fashion boutique. I wanted a place of my own, a beautiful storefront in my hometown of Salt Lake City, where I could curate local designers and build something from the ground up. Every paycheck, I siphoned a huge chunk into my savings. I lived in a tiny apartment with a leaky radiator just so I could hoard every penny. I have always been like this. Hyper-responsible, intensely focused, and completely independent. I had to be. Growing up, I was the reliable older sister, the one who took care of things, the one who never asked for help. And then there was my younger sister, Cassidy. Cassidy is 27, but you would think she was a spoiled teenager if you spent 5 minutes with her. In our house, Cassidy was the golden child. She never had to work for anything. If she wanted a new car, my mom, Valerie, would magically find the money. If Cassidy failed a class in college, my mom would blame the professor. Valerie enabled Cassidy's absolute worst traits. I remember when I was in high school, working weekends at a diner to save up for a laptop. I kept the cash in a shoebox in my closet. One day, $150 went missing. I knew Cassidy took it. She came home the next day with brand new designer shoes she definitely could not afford. When I confronted her, she cried, and my mom actually yelled at me. She told me to stop being so jealous of my sister and to keep the peace in the family. That was the dynamic. I worked, Cassidy took, and my mom protected her. I learned very early on that if I wanted anything in this life, I had to build an impenetrable fortress around it. I moved to Chicago the second I graduated college just to get away from that toxic environment. I loved my family, but I loved my sanity more. The only real anchor I had in my family was my dad, Harrison. My dad is a quiet, hardworking man. He made a small fortune in real estate over the decades, completely self-made. He was the one who taught me the value of a dollar and the importance of having a work ethic. He was also the only one who seemed to truly see what was going on in our house, even if he worked too many hours to stop my mom's constant coddling of Cassidy. A few months ago, my dad called me on a random Tuesday night. I was sitting on my worn-out sofa, eating cold takeout and staring blindly at a spreadsheet. He asked me how the savings for the boutique were going. I gave him a tired laugh and told him I was getting there, maybe another 5 years, and I could finally sign a lease. He went quiet for a moment, and then he said words that completely changed the trajectory of my life. He said he was incredibly proud of the woman I had become, how hard I worked, and how independent I was. Then he told me he was wiring me $800,000. I thought I misheard him. $800,000? I dropped my fork. I asked him to repeat it, my heart hammering against my ribs. He laughed, a warm, genuine sound, and said it was my early inheritance, seed money for my business. He said I had earned it by never asking for a handout and always doing the right thing. The next morning, I logged into my bank account, and there it was. A transfer for exactly $800,000. I just sat at my desk and cried. It was not just the money, it was the validation. It was my dad looking at me and saying, "I believe in you." I immediately went into overdrive. I started looking at commercial real estate listings in Salt Lake City. I found a gorgeous, sunlit space in the Sugar House neighborhood, right near where I grew up. I started contacting designers, drafting business plans, and finally, for the first time in my adult life, I handed in my resignation letter at the marketing firm. I was moving back home. I was going to be a business owner. When I told my mom the news, her reaction was entirely predictable. She said, "Oh, that's nice, Natalie. Are you sure you know how to run a store? You know Cassidy has a great eye for fashion. Maybe you should hire her." I just rolled my eyes and changed the subject. I was not going to let Valerie's passive-aggressive comments ruin my moment. This was my time. It was 9 o'clock on a Friday morning. I was in the middle of packing up my Chicago apartment, surrounded by cardboard boxes and bubble wrap. My dad's 60th birthday was that weekend, and he had been talking about this party for months. He had hired a caterer, rented a huge tent for the backyard, and invited half the neighborhood. I had bought him a beautiful, vintage pocket watch, something he had mentioned wanting years ago. I was supposed to fly out the next day. I was taping up a box of books when my phone buzzed. It was Cassidy. We rarely spoke unless she needed something, so seeing her name on the screen immediately made my stomach tighten. I answered, putting her on speakerphone as I continued to tape. "Hey," she said. Her voice was too high, breathless, and rushed. "Listen, change of plans. Dad's party is canceled." I stopped what I was doing. "Canceled? Why? What happened?" "He's sick," Cassidy said quickly. "Really sick. Some horrible stomach flu or something. He's been throwing up all night. Mom says he just needs to rest, so we are calling everyone off. You don't need to fly out tomorrow. Just stay in Chicago. Save your money on the flight." I frowned, staring at the phone. Something felt entirely off. "Is he okay? Has he seen a doctor? I can still fly out and just help take care of him. I already paid for the ticket anyway." "No." Cassidy practically shouted the word, then quickly lowered her voice. "No, seriously, Natalie. He doesn't want anyone seeing him like this. He told me specifically to tell you not to come. Just stay there. We will celebrate when you move back permanently." Before I could ask another question, she hung up. The line went dead. I stood there in my living room, the tape dispenser heavy in my hand. The silence in the apartment was deafening. Nothing about that phone call made sense. First of all, my dad never gets sick. He is built like an ox. Second, if he was sick enough to cancel his 60th birthday party, a milestone he had been bragging about for half a year, he would have called me himself. He would have wanted to hear my voice. He would never relay a message like that through Cassidy. And Cassidy's tone was completely wrong. She didn't sound worried about our dad. She sounded panicked about me coming home. The way she insisted I stay in Chicago, the way she rushed to get off the phone. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I have known my sister my entire life, and I know exactly what she sounds like when she is lying. I pulled up my messages. Not a single text from my dad. Not a single text from my mom. I tried calling my dad's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. I tried calling the house landline. It rang and rang until the machine picked up. My heart started beating a little faster. Something was very, very wrong, and I was not going to sit around in Chicago waiting to find out what it was. I needed to think clearly. I sat down on a half-packed box and opened my laptop. I figured if there was a family emergency, maybe someone had sent an email. I checked my main inbox. Nothing. Just out of habit, I clicked over to my spam folder to clear it out. As I scanned the junk emails, one subject line caught my eye. It was from the bank, the same bank where my dad had wired the $800,000. The subject line read, "Notice of joint account structure change." I clicked on it. It was an automated, no-reply email stating that the withdrawal limits and authorization signatures on an account ending in 4492 had been successfully updated. I stared at the screen, my brow furrowed. My checking account ended in a completely different number. I had no idea what account this was referring to. I tried to log into my banking portal to search for it, but nothing showed up under my name. It was like a digital ghost. I brushed it off as a glitch or maybe a scam email, but the uneasy feeling in my chest was growing heavier by the second. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. I needed boots on the ground in Salt Lake City. I picked up my phone and dialed my Aunt Beverly. Beverly is my dad's younger sister, and she is the absolute opposite of my mom. Beverly takes zero nonsense from anyone, least of all Valerie and Cassidy. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Natalie, honey, are you packed for tomorrow? Beverly's voice was bright and loud. I froze. Aunt Beverly, the party is still on? Of course it's on, she laughed. I just left your parents' house an hour ago. The caterers were dropping off the tables. Your dad was out back arguing with the tent guys about the lighting. I felt the blood drain from my face. My dad is out back? He's not sick. Sick? The man was eating a giant pastrami sandwich when I left. Why? Who told you he was sick? Cassidy, I whispered. Cassidy called me an hour ago and told me the party was canceled. She told me not to fly out. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. When Beverly finally spoke, all the warmth was gone from her voice. Natalie, I don't want to alarm you, but something very weird is going on with your sister. And your mother. What do you mean? I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. I saw Cassidy at the outdoor mall 3 days ago, Beverly said, her tone hushed and serious. She was walking out of a luxury boutique carrying 3 massive shopping bags. She had a brand new Birkin bag on her arm. Do you know how much those cost? At least $15,000. When I asked her how she could afford it on a part-time receptionist salary, she got incredibly defensive and practically ran to her car. And get this, she was bragging on social media last week about booking first-class tickets for a luxury vacation to Milan. I couldn't breathe. Milan. Birkin bags. A fake canceled party. An automated bank email hidden in my spam folder. The pieces were starting to snap together in my mind, forming a picture so ugly and terrifying that my brain immediately tried to reject it. I did not pack. I threw 3 days' worth of clothes into a carry-on bag, grabbed the pocket watch I bought for my dad, and booked the very next flight out of O'Hare Airport. I managed to secure a seat on a 1 o'clock departure. The entire cab ride to the airport, I was vibrating with a mix of adrenaline and pure, unadulterated dread. I texted my boss to say I was taking my remaining PTO days effective immediately. I didn't text anyone in my family. Let them think I was sitting quietly in my apartment, obediently following Cassidy's instructions. The flight from Chicago to Salt Lake City is about 3.5 hours. It felt like 3.5 years. I sat in my cramped window seat, staring out at the clouds, completely trapped in my own head. I kept returning to the automated bank email. A joint account. Changes to the authorization. I knew my dad was generous, but he was also traditional. When I was younger, he always talked about setting up trust funds or joint savings for us when we got older, something to help us buy a house or start a life. Had he set one up? And if he did, who had access to it? The memories started flooding in, suffocating me in the pressurized cabin. I remembered being 19, coming home from college for the summer. I had managed to secure a highly competitive, paid internship in the city. Cassidy was 16, spending her days lounging by the pool and complaining about being bored. One afternoon, I checked my debit card balance to pay for my train pass and $1,000 was missing. Just gone. I panicked, thinking my card was stolen. When I tore my room apart looking for clues, I found a receipt stuffed in the bottom of Cassidy's trash can for a VIP music festival ticket and a whole new wardrobe. Exactly $1,000. I marched downstairs, shaking with rage, and confronted her in front of my mom. Cassidy didn't even deny it. She just started fake crying, saying she wanted to have a good summer and I was being greedy because I already had a job. Valerie, my own mother, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Natalie, it is just money. She is your little sister. Don't ruin the family dynamic over a stupid concert. I will pay you back eventually." She never paid me back. That was the day I realized my mother would gladly set me on fire to keep my sister warm. As the plane began its descent over the snow-capped mountains of Utah, the dread solidified into a hard, cold fury. My mother's history of enabling. Cassidy's sudden, explosive wealth. The desperate lie to keep me away from my father. They had done something. Something much bigger than a stolen $1,000. I gripped the armrests of my seat until my knuckles turned white. Whatever they had done, whatever they were hiding, I was going to rip it out into the light. The plane landed at 3:30 in the afternoon, local time. The air in Salt Lake City was crisp and dry, a stark contrast to the humid chill of Chicago. I grabbed my rental car and merged onto the highway, my hands gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2. I did not turn on the radio. The silence in the car was heavy, matching the weight settling in my chest. By the time I navigated through the late afternoon traffic and pulled into the familiar, tree-lined streets of the Sugar House neighborhood, it was exactly 5:30. The sun was just starting to dip below the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the manicured lawns. As I turned the corner onto my parents' street, my stomach bottomed out. The street was lined with cars. Vehicles were parked bumper to bumper all the way down the block. When my parents' house came into view, the reality of Cassidy's lie hit me like a physical blow. The house was blazing with light. A massive, elegant white tent was erected in the backyard, glowing from within. 2 large catering vans were parked in the driveway, and people dressed in evening wear were casually strolling up the front walkway, carrying wrapped gifts and bottles of wine. The party was not canceled. My dad was not sick. I parked my rental car 2 blocks down so they would not recognize it. I sat there for a full minute, just breathing. In and out. I grabbed my bag, checked my reflection in the mirror to make sure my face was composed, and walked toward the house. I didn't knock. The front door was slightly ajar, the sounds of jazz music and clinking glasses spilling out into the cool evening air. I pushed the door open and stepped into the grand foyer. It took exactly 10 seconds for someone to notice me. It was Valerie. My mother was standing near the staircase, holding a champagne flute, chatting loudly with a neighbor. She turned her head, her eyes sweeping over the crowd, and then she saw me. I have never, in my 30 years of life, seen the color drain from a human being's face so fast. She went completely gray. The champagne flute slipped slightly in her hand, the liquid sloshing over the rim and onto the hardwood floor. She couldn't speak. She just stared at me, her eyes wide with absolute terror. A second later, Cassidy walked out of the kitchen carrying a plate of hors d'oeuvres. She was wearing a dress that easily cost $3,000, her wrists dripping in gold bracelets. She followed my mother's terrified gaze and locked eyes with me. Cassidy actually stumbled backward, her heel catching on the rug. The plate tipped, sending miniature crab cakes scattering across the floor. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. Before either of them could say a single word, a booming, joyful voice echoed from the living room. "Natalie." It was my dad. Harrison pushed his way through the crowd, looking perfectly healthy, wearing a sharp new suit, a massive smile spreading across his face. He wrapped me in a huge, crushing hug. "You made it. I thought you were working late and taking the red eye." I hugged him back tightly, looking over his shoulder straight at my mother and sister. They were frozen in place, utterly trapped. "No, Dad," I said, my voice loud and clear over the music. "I wouldn't miss this for the world. I had a feeling I really needed to be here." Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with the name of the city you live in. Every comment helps the video reach more viewers. Thank you very much. The next 2 hours were the most surreal, agonizing experience of my entire life. I walked through my childhood home, a house I had always associated with warmth and safety, and felt like a spy behind enemy lines. The party was in full swing. A jazz quartet was playing softly in the corner of the living room, and waiters in crisp white shirts were circulating with trays of expensive appetizers. My dad, completely oblivious to the radioactive tension radiating from his wife and youngest daughter, was in his element. He was laughing, shaking hands, and proudly introducing me to his former business partners, boasting about my upcoming boutique. I played the part of the dutiful, loving daughter flawlessly. I smiled until my cheeks ached, made polite small talk, and laughed at all the right jokes. But my eyes never stopped moving. I watched Valerie. My mother, who usually thrived in these social settings, was completely falling apart in plain sight. She was aggressively drinking her wine, her knuckles white around the glass stem. She avoided my gaze like I was made of fire. Every time I walked into a room, she would abruptly turn and walk out, suddenly needing to check on the caterers or find a non-existent napkin. And then there was Cassidy. Cassidy had completely lost her usual arrogant swagger. She was lingering near the back doors, her shoulders hunched, jumping slightly every time someone called her name. The heavy gold bracelets on her wrists clinked together loudly because her hands were shaking so much. They both knew that I knew something, even if they were not sure exactly how much I knew. About an hour into the party, Aunt Beverly found me. She grabbed me by the elbow and pulled me into the quiet hallway near the downstairs guest bathroom, checking to make sure no one was listening. "All right," Beverly whispered, her eyes sharp and assessing. "You made it. Did you talk to them?" I shook my head, keeping my voice low. I told her everything I had pieced together so far. The frantic phone call from Cassidy trying to stop me from coming. The automated email about a joint account structure change sitting in my spam folder. I asked Beverly for the exact dates of Cassidy's sudden shopping spree and her trip to Milan. Beverly pulled out her phone and scrolled through some screenshots she had taken of Cassidy's social media pages. Here, she pointed to a photo of Cassidy posing in front of a famous cathedral in Italy, holding that $15,000 bag. She posted this 3 weeks ago. But the spending started about a month and a half ago. First it was a new luxury car down payment, then the clothes, then the trip. A month and a half ago. The exact same timeline as the bank email. My stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. I leaned against the hallway wall, closing my eyes. It was one thing to suspect it, it was another to have the timeline match up so perfectly. They had stolen from me. My own mother and sister had conspired to drain an account that had my name on it, an account I didn't even know I had. Beverly squeezed my arm. "What are you going to do, Natalie?" she asked softly. I opened my eyes and looked down the hall toward the dining room. "I am going to wait," I said. "I am going to let them think they might just get away with it tonight. And then I am going to burn it all down." By 8 o'clock, the caterers had set up a massive, elegant buffet, and all 40 guests were seated at the various round tables scattered throughout the ground floor and the backyard tent. My dad had insisted on having our immediate family sit together at the main dining table in the center of the room. It was a beautiful setup, crystal glasses, heavy silver flatware, and a massive floral centerpiece. I sat on my dad's right. Valerie sat on his left. Cassidy was seated directly across from me. The air at our table was so thick and tense you could have cut it with a steak knife. Cassidy was pushing her food around her plate, not taking a single bite. Valerie kept dabbing at her mouth with a linen napkin, her eyes starting nervously around the room. I calmly ate my dinner, savoring every bite of the roasted tenderloin, maintaining a pleasant, relaxed expression. I could feel their anxiety rolling off them in waves. When the plates were finally cleared, the waiters wheeled out a massive, tiered chocolate cake with sparkling candles. The entire house sang happy birthday. My dad stood up, his face flushed with happiness, and blew out the candles to a round of applause. He held up his hands, asking for quiet. The room slowly hushed. He picked up his champagne glass, tapping the side with a spoon. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he started, his voice booming and full of emotion. Turning 60 is a milestone that makes a man look back at his life. I have built businesses, I have made deals, but looking around this room, looking at my family, I know what my true legacy is. He smiled warmly down at Valerie, who looked like she was about to be physically sick. Then he looked at Cassidy, and finally, he turned to me. "I have always tried to provide for my girls," my dad continued, the room completely silent now, hanging on his every word. "I wanted to make sure they never had to struggle the way I did when I was young. A few months ago, I was finally able to do something I had been planning for a decade." He put his hand on my shoulder. I sat perfectly still. "Natalie here is opening her own business. She is going to be incredibly successful. I gave her some seed money for that, but I also wanted to make sure both of my daughters had a solid, unbreakable foundation for whatever life throws at them." He paused, taking a sip of his champagne. He looked at me, his eyes full of pride and genuine curiosity. The silence in the room stretched out. And then, He dropped the bomb that shattered our family forever. So, Natalie, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet dining room. I have been meaning to ask you. The $500,000 I gave you, the money in the joint trust, separate from the boutique fund, what did you do with it? Did you invest it, or are you saving it for a house? The room seemed to freeze. All the air was sucked out of my lungs. I knew a theft had happened, but I had no idea of the scale. $500,000. $500,000. My fork slipped from my fingers and clattered loudly against the fine china plate. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I stared at my father, my mind completely blank. 500,000? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Dad, what do you mean? My dad frowned, his warm smile faltering slightly. He leaned in closer to me, thinking perhaps I hadn't heard him correctly over the lingering background noise. The trust account, sweetheart, he said, his tone patient but slightly confused. The one I set up at the Federal Bank. I deposited $500,000 for you, and another $500,000 for Cassidy. It was meant to be a surprise, but the bank sent the notification letters out last month. I figured you had seen it. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I looked across the table. Cassidy's face had gone completely devoid of color. She looked like a wax statue. Valerie was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles looked like they might burst through her skin. I opened my mouth to speak, to tell him I had never received any letter, never seen any money, but before I could get a single word out, Cassidy jumped in. She probably just forgot, Dad. Cassidy's voice was shrill, way too loud, cutting through the silence of the room. She forced a laugh that sounded like glass breaking. You know how stressed Natalie has been with moving from Chicago. Her brain is probably just scattered right now. Right, Nat? You probably just missed the email or something. I slowly turned my head and looked at my sister. The sheer audacity of her, sitting there dripping in jewelry paid for with my stolen future, trying to gaslight me in front of 40 people. I felt a slow, dark anger rise up from the pit of my stomach, burning away all the shock and leaving only pure, crystalline rage. I did not forget, I said, my voice dangerously low and steady. I didn't take my eyes off Cassidy. You do not forget $500,000. I never received a letter. I never received a penny. I have no idea what account you are talking about. My dad's posture changed instantly. The relaxed, happy host vanished, replaced by the sharp, ruthless businessman who had built an empire. He stood up straight, his jaw tightening. He looked at me, then at Cassidy, and finally down at his wife. Valerie, he said, his voice dropping an octave, sounding like distant thunder. You were the co-signer on those trust accounts. I had you handle the final authorization paperwork so the girls could access the funds. Where is Natalie's money? Valerie opened her mouth, but only a pathetic, squeaking sound came out. She looked around the room. The guests were completely silent, realizing they were witnessing a catastrophic family implosion. Some people awkwardly looked down at their laps, others stared in unabashed horror. Dad, seriously, it is just a bank error, Cassidy tried again, her voice trembling now. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. We can call them on Monday. Let's just eat cake and not ruin your birthday over a stupid clerical mistake. Sit down, Cassidy, my dad ordered. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Cassidy dropped back into her chair as if her strings had been cut. My dad turned his full, terrifying attention to my mother. I am going to ask you one more time, Valerie. And you had better tell me the absolute truth. Did you authorize the release of Natalie's funds? The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Aunt Beverly stepped forward from the crowd. She walked right up to the edge of the dining table, her arms crossed over her chest. She didn't authorize it for Natalie, Harrison, Beverly said, her voice clear and unapologetic. She authorized it for Cassidy. Cassidy has been spending money like a lottery winner for the last month. First-class flights to Europe, luxury cars, designer bags. I saw it myself. My dad turned slowly to look at his youngest daughter. Cassidy burst into tears. It wasn't the fake, manipulative crying I was used to. It was the ugly, desperate sobbing of someone who had just been backed into a corner with no way out. I didn't mean to, Cassidy wailed, hiding her face in her hands. I thought it was a shared pool of money. I just wanted to live a little. I needed to maintain my lifestyle, Dad. Natalie already has a job. She didn't need it right now. Maintain your lifestyle? My dad repeated, his voice barely a whisper, but it carried across the room. You stole $500,000 from your sister to buy handbags? Harrison, please. Valerie finally broke, reaching out to grab his sleeve. He yanked his arm away as if she had burned him. Valerie was crying now too, her makeup running down her face. It was a mistake. Cassidy got into some credit card debt and I thought we could just borrow from Natalie's side. Just for a little while. I was going to figure out a way to pay it back before Natalie ever noticed. She is your daughter, Harrison. She needed help. She needed help paying off credit cards, so you gave her access to her sister's entire trust fund? I said, my voice shaking with a fury I couldn't contain anymore. You forged my authorization, Mom. You gave her my money. You lied to keep me in Chicago so I wouldn't find out. I am so sorry, Natalie. We were going to fix it, Valerie pleaded, looking at me with wide, desperate eyes. My dad looked at his wife of 35 years with a level of disgust I had never seen before. He didn't scream. He didn't throw anything. The absolute coldness in his eyes was far more terrifying than any rage. He reached into his suit jacket pocket and pulled out his cell phone. He dialed 3 numbers and put the phone to his ear right there at the dinner table. Harrison, what are you doing? Valerie gasped, her eyes going wide with fresh panic. Harrison, put the phone down. We are family. We can handle this privately. My dad ignored her. He looked right through her. Yes, hello, operator, he said into the phone, his voice completely steady and devoid of emotion. I need to report a grand larceny. Yes, a theft. The amount is $500,000. The perpetrators are currently at my residence. Yes, I will hold. Pandemonium broke out. The guests immediately started standing up, grabbing their coats and purses, rushing for the front door to escape the fallout. Cassidy let out a blood-curdling scream, burying her face in the tablecloth. Valerie fell to her knees, sobbing hysterically and begging my dad to hang up. I just sat there in my chair, perfectly still, watching the illusion of my family shatter into a million irreparable pieces. 30 minutes later, the flashing red and blue lights of 3 police cruisers illuminated the white party tent in the backyard. The Salt Lake City Police Precinct was a stark, unforgiving place. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with a headache-inducing hum, casting a sickly yellow pallor over the linoleum floors. I was sitting on a hard plastic bench in a small waiting area, clutching a cold cup of bad coffee. My dad sat next to me, staring blankly at the wall opposite us. He had aged 10 years in the span of 4 hours. Aunt Beverly was pacing the hallway, her arms crossed, keeping a silent, protective watch over us. Cassidy and Valerie were in separate interrogation rooms down the hall. They had been read their rights right there in our foyer, handcuffed in front of the caterers, and escorted out the front door in their expensive evening gowns. A detective wearing a wrinkled suit and a tired expression finally walked out of the back hallway holding a legal pad. He approached us, pulling up a chair and sitting down heavily. Mr. Harrison, Natalie, he said, keeping his voice professional but entirely devoid of comfort. We have finished taking their statements. Your wife and daughter have both waived their right to counsel for the time being. They have confessed to the sequence of events. Where is the money? My dad asked. It was the first time he had spoken since we arrived at the precinct. His voice sounded like grinding stones. The detective sighed and looked down at his notes. That is the difficult part. Your wife, Valerie, utilized her status as the co-signer to bypass the dual signature requirement. She transferred the entirety of Natalie's $500,000 trust into a private checking account solely controlled by Cassidy. This occurred approximately 45 days ago. He flipped a page. Cassidy then proceeded to aggressively liquidate those funds. She purchased a luxury SUV outright. She booked multiple international vacations. She purchased high-end jewelry, designer clothing, and accessories. She also transferred a significant sum to a private investment account that took a massive loss in the market 2 weeks ago. I felt physically ill. My vision blurred around the edges. "How much is left?" I asked, my voice cracking. The detective looked at me with a trace of genuine pity. "We are working with the banks to freeze the remaining assets, but based on her initial statements and the digital footprint we can see, there is roughly $8,000 left in liquid cash." $8,000. Out of $500,000. It was gone. The security my dad had worked his entire life to build for me, the safety net that was supposed to protect my future, had been completely obliterated in less than 2 months. Cassidy had treated my future like a bottomless ATM to fund a temporary fantasy. I closed my eyes, a single tear escaping and tracking down my cheek. My dad reached out and placed his large, warm hand over mine. He squeezed it tightly. "Are you pressing charges?" the detective asked my dad. My dad didn't hesitate for a single second. We sat on one side of a long mahogany conference table. Valerie and Cassidy sat on the other, flanked by a tired-looking public defender. The transformation in them was jarring. The expensive clothes and arrogant attitudes were completely gone. Cassidy looked small and terrified, her face pale, her hair pulled back into a messy knot. Valerie looked completely broken. She kept wringing her hands together, staring pleadingly at my dad. "Harrison, please," Valerie started, the moment the lawyers finished exchanging documents. Her voice was shaking, thick with tears. "You have to stop this. You are going to send your own daughter to prison. You are going to ruin her life. We can figure this out. I will get a job. We will pay Natalie back, every single penny, I swear to you on my life. Just drop the charges. Blood is thicker than water. We are family." I looked at the woman who gave birth to me. For 30 years, I had craved her approval. I had twisted myself into knots trying to be the perfect, responsible daughter so she would look at me the way she looked at Cassidy. And sitting there, listening to her beg, I finally realized the truth. She wasn't begging for me. She wasn't sorry that I had been robbed. She was only sorry that Cassidy was facing consequences for the first time in her pampered life. To Valerie, I was collateral damage. I was just the necessary sacrifice to keep Cassidy comfortable. Blood didn't mean loyalty. Blood just meant they knew exactly where to insert the knife. "Do not talk about family to me," my dad said, his voice slicing through her tears like a razor blade. "You destroyed this family the second you signed that paper. You stole from your own child to feed the ego of the other. You are not a mother. You are an accomplice." He reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out a thick manila envelope, and slid it across the polished table. It stopped right in front of Valerie. "Those are divorce papers. I have already filed them. My lawyers will be in touch regarding the division of assets, though considering the staggering debt you now owe your daughter, I wouldn't expect much." Valerie stared at the envelope as if it were a live grenade. Cassidy began to quietly sob into her hands. I didn't feel an ounce of pity. I just felt a profound, exhausting emptiness. I stood up, buttoned my coat, and walked out of the room without looking back. The legal wheels turned slowly, but they ground exceedingly fine. The next few weeks were a blur of depositions, bank audits, and meetings with attorneys. I threw myself entirely into the preparation of my boutique. It was my only lifeline, the only thing that kept me from drowning in the betrayal. The original $800,000 my dad had given me was safe in a completely separate, secure business account. I signed the lease on the space in Sugar House and began the arduous process of remodeling. One afternoon, my dad asked me to meet him at the office of his estate lawyer, Susan. Susan was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had handled my dad's real estate contracts for 20 years. When I arrived, my dad was already sitting in the leather armchair, looking exhausted but deeply resolute. Susan handed me a freshly printed, incredibly thick legal document. "Natalie," Susan said, adjusting her glasses, "your father has completely restructured his estate. Given the severity of the criminal charges and the breach of fiduciary duty, he has made some permanent changes." I looked down at the document. It was a newly drafted will and trust agreement. "I cut them out," my dad said quietly. "Completely. Valerie will get the bare minimum required by state divorce laws, which will immediately be garnished to pay back your restitution. Cassidy is entirely disinherited. She will not receive a single dime from my estate, not now and not when I pass. He pointed to the paperwork in my hands. Everything else, the house, the investment portfolios, the remaining liquid assets, is solely in your name now, Natalie. It is in a completely locked-down trust. No one can ever touch it but you. I stared at the pages, the legal jargon swimming before my eyes. I was essentially inheriting a multi-million-dollar empire. But holding that paper, I didn't feel wealthy. I felt the crushing weight of what it had cost to get here. It was a victory born entirely from the ashes of my family. A few months later, the criminal case concluded. Cassidy and Valerie accepted a plea deal to avoid doing hard time in a state penitentiary. The judge, clearly disgusted by their actions, did not go easy on them. They were convicted of felony theft. They were sentenced to 3 years of heavily supervised probation. If they missed a single meeting with their parole officer or failed a single drug test, they would go straight to jail. Furthermore, the judge ordered total financial restitution. Every single asset Cassidy had purchased with my money was seized by the state and auctioned off. The luxury SUV, the designer bags, the jewelry, all of it was liquidated. The court ordered that 25% of both Cassidy and Valerie's future wages would be automatically garnished and deposited into my account until the $500,000 was fully repaid. Given their earning potential, they would be paying me back for the rest of their natural lives. Time has a strange way of moving forward, dragging you along with it whether you are ready or not. A year has passed since the night of the birthday party. The landscape of my life is completely unrecognizable. I hear updates about Valerie and Cassidy occasionally, mostly through the mandatory court restitution letters I receive in the mail every month. They are living in a tiny, one-bedroom apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city, miles away from the manicured lawns of Sugar House. Cassidy, who once thought she was too good to work a regular job, is now working 40 hours a week as a cashier at a discount grocery store. Her wages are garnished so heavily that she can barely afford her half of the rent. Valerie, who prided herself on her social status and country club lunches, is working the night shift at a call center. The stress and the poverty have aged them both terribly. They have no cars, no savings, and no future. The karma is absolute and devastating. They sacrificed their family, their dignity, and their freedom for a few fleeting weeks of unearned luxury. Now, they are trapped in a prison of their own making, suffocating under the weight of a debt they can never realistically repay. Sometimes, when I see the meager checks deposited into my account, $100 here, $200 there, I try to find some sense of vindictive satisfaction. But the truth is, I just feel a cold, hollow indifference. They are strangers to me now. Ghosts of a life I used to live. Today was the grand opening of my boutique. The sun was shining brightly, pouring through the large, pristine glass windows of my storefront. The interior was exactly as I had dreamed it in my tiny, freezing apartment in Chicago: hardwood floors, minimalist brass racks, and racks of beautiful, hand-selected clothing. The smell of fresh paint and expensive perfume filled the air. My dad was the first person to arrive. He was wearing a sharp suit, carrying a massive bouquet of white lilies. He looked around the store, his eyes shining with unshed tears of pride. Aunt Beverly arrived shortly after, loudly demanding a glass of champagne and immediately buying 3 silk scarves to stimulate the local economy. As the day went on, the store filled with customers, friends, and neighbors. It was a resounding success. I stood behind the counter, ringing up sales, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over me. The betrayal I had suffered was a horrific, scarring experience. But it was also the exact catalyst I needed. It forced me to cut the toxic rot out of my life permanently. It showed me who my real family was. My dad and my aunt stood by me, unwavering and fierce. I had built this sanctuary with my own 2 hands, fueled by the faith of a father who truly loved me. I looked out the front window at the bustling street of my hometown, taking a deep, clean breath. I was free. They destroyed our family over money, and even though they are struggling to survive now, My mother still tries to send me letters begging for forgiveness, claiming blood is thicker than water. Am I wrong for ignoring her letters, or should I at least let her see me once? Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and the bell icon so you never miss a story. Let me know what you think I should do in the comments below. See you in the next video.